Production of Vote Utah 2014 election night coverage is made possible by generous grants from Zions Bank, serving the communities of Utah for over 140 years. Zions Bank offers a range of banking services for individuals and businesses, large and small. Learn more at zionsbank.com. And from Qualtrics, supporting business and the academic community with online survey services and expertise. More information at qualtrics.com. Qualtrics, the ridiculously powerful insight platform. And from the law firm of Ray, Quinney & Nebeker, a multi-service local law firm actively seeking to improve the quality of life in our community. Over 100 attorneys serve Utahns' legal needs from offices in Salt Lake City and Provo. Learn more at rqn.com. Additional production funding comes from Google, a global technology leader focused on improving the ways people connect with information. And from Nu Skin, demonstrating a 30-year commitment to community support and offering nutritional and personal care products. Nu Skin, the difference demonstrated. Learn more at nuskin.com.
And Utah voters raised their voices several ways this election day 2014. Today, many stood in line to vote with an electronic voting machine. In the days leading up to November 4th, some had voted early at polling stations in their communities. Some voters today, as well as early voters, met students from the KBYU Utah College's exit poll, handing out a survey. They were part of a 1,200-person army from colleges and universities around this state. The survey they were handing out will be used in our broadcast tonight, bringing you insight into Utah's 2014 vote. Hello, once again, I'm Ken Verdoia, and leading us through this mountain of election data, and it is indeed a mountain this evening, the director of the KBYU Utah College's poll, Dr. David Magleby, Distinguished Professor of Political Science at Brigham Young University. David, good to be back with you at BYU. With all of these changes in the process of how we vote, it must make it difficult for an exit poller to find the sense and find that rhythm.
It is hard because there's so much new information coming in. It used to be easier in the old days, 10 and 20 years ago, 30 years ago when we started this, because we just had to talk to voters at the voting booth. But now we need to find ways to communicate with those who have voted early, either by mail ballots or in early voting places. Well, I think we ought to talk a little bit with Royce, who is a student in statistics, a little bit about the sample and how that was drawn. Let's go to Royce here in just a moment. He's a student in the statistics class that has played a substantial role in we want to go to Kentucky. We're going to come back to you, Royce. We're going to be tracking key Senate races around the country tonight, and one has been called just before we came on the air. It's the contest in Kentucky, and for that race we want to go to Christian Carter. Tell us what's happening there, Christian.
Yeah, for about the last hour, various news sources have called the Kentucky Senate race in favor of longtime Republican Mitch McConnell, defeating his Democratic opponent, Allison Lundergan Grimes.
And through the course of the evening, we're going to be taking a look at a map, helping the viewers understand how this battle for control of the Senate is shaping up tonight. As we went into tonight, most news sources agreed that the division between the two parties was even, 45 to 45. That adds the seats that both parties held that are not up for election this year and the seats that are safe seats. The Kentucky race is not a safe seat, and that race going to Republicans means the balance is now 45 Democrats, 46 Republicans, with 9 seats to be determined. So here is the Senate present with 45 Democrats, now 46 Republicans. You can see those 9 gray seats in the middle of our graphic. As the evening proceeds, the regional analysts, Ken and I, will be discussing those 9 races and tracking them to help you understand who's going to control the Senate as we convene the next Congress.
And let us point out the most obvious of all facts, that over the course of the next 50 minutes or so, we are going to be having races throughout this nation close their polls and projections made by various media entities. We can practice, we can rehearse, we can develop a script, but the spontaneity of what's going out in the real world will be driving our next hour. So with apologies at times if we try to make those connections as we go on through this evening, we do want to take up the simple premise of a midterm election, David, because generally we view voter turnouts to dip in those years, yet there seemed to be kind of a counter motivation. Voters are angry this year.
Well, they are, and the question is that anger going to drive them to the polls, or is it going to drive them to be so cynical that they think it doesn't matter? And I think we'll want to watch that as the evening proceeds. I think the sense around the country is that it's going to drive them to inaction. Midterms can, as you mentioned, generally speaking, have lower rates of turnout, and it's not random who doesn't vote. The people who tend to drop off between presidential and midterm years tend to be younger voters especially, tend to be less interested or less involved voters, tend to be minority voters, and tend to be Democrats. And so midterms, at least of late, have tended to benefit the Republicans.
Let's go back to Christian Carter for some additional insight in the Kentucky race. Christian?
So this win for McConnell is not surprising, as his opponent, Grimes, was really trying this whole campaign to really define herself. And as a theme in all these races that we'll be looking at, she was really trying to distinguish herself from President Obama.
And the viewers are now seeing, Christian, a photo of Ms. Grimes with former President Bill Clinton.
Yes. So one of her main tactics was to really call herself a Clinton Democrat, and she did have the benefit of being a family friend with the Clinton family, and as such, really trying to show that some of the unpopularity associated with the president should not be associated with her and her campaign.
And what did McConnell do? Did he try to link her to Obama?
He said there's no difference between a Clinton and an Obama Democrat. So, and this race really shows that that some of those efforts that she'd been making perhaps didn't pay off.
This is going to be a theme we're going to revisit over and over through the course of the evening, Ken. The tactics of 2014 clearly were for Republicans to try and link Democrats to Obama, even though Obama rarely visited many of these battleground states, and for Democrats to try and define the race as not a referendum on Obama, but a referendum on their service and on state issues.
Well, let's take a look at the way Mitch McConnell actually referred to Grimes during the course of the campaign, and some of his paid advertising gives you a little additional insight into the way it was being cast.
Allison Lundergan Grimes' refusal to say who she's voted for president is now the non-answer heard round the country.
Did you vote for President Obama, 2008, 2012?
You know, this election,
she refused to answer.
Dodging whether she voted for President Obama.
And Kentuckians expect her to cast a tough vote on anything? Is she ever going to answer a tough question on anything?
So you're not going to answer?
I'm Mitch McConnell, and I approve this message.
I think she disqualified herself. I really do.
Christian, Ms. Grimes did not go quietly into that good night. She fired back as well, did she not?
Yes, she did. She really labeled Senator McConnell as Mr. Gridlock, being highly associated with the government shutdown from last year and various of the struggle in Congress. And as such, I think that was one of the biggest efforts she was making on the offensive against him.
Let's take a look at one of her paid ads as well.
Mitch McConnell wants you to think I'm Barack Obama. Mitch is the same guy who thought Duke basketball players were UK, or who's attacking me on coal after doing next to nothing while we've lost thousands of coal jobs. He even said it's not his job to bring jobs to Kentucky.
I'm not Barack Obama. I disagree with him on guns, coal, and the EPA. And Mitch, that's not how you hold a gun. I'm Allison Lundergan Grimes, and I approve this message.
She gave as good as she got, but in the long run, when you look at the numbers that are coming in tonight in Kentucky, Mitch McConnell held where he had to hold, and Allison Grimes was unable to get enough lift out of Lexington and the areas around the university to put her beyond the strength of that incumbency. We have another key race in the South that we're keeping a very close eye on, and this is an extraordinary race in the state of Georgia. It involves a legacy race, if you will, involving the name of Nunn. I used to know a senator by the name of Sam Nunn, who was a legend in his own time. And let's go to Audrey Heaton, who is our regional analyst keeping an eye on the race in Georgia for the United States Senate. Audrey, it's a little early, but what have you been finding out?
So far, the polling shows that that David Perdue, the Republican candidate, is ahead. However, what has tended to be the case in Georgia is that the rural, more Republican regions will count earlier and first, and the cities will be last. And the cities tend to lean more Democratic, so it's still anyone's race at this point.
What's the interesting part about this? And I'm setting you up for the big one, because this may not be the final word on November 4th in this race.
Mm-hmm. This race requires that a candidate get 50% of the vote in order to send someone to the Senate. And in pre-election polling, there showed that Democrat Michelle Nunn and Republican David Perdue were about dead even, with a Libertarian candidate, Amanda Swafford, with about 4% of the vote, which means none of them would be getting at 50%. So if that happens, we will go to a runoff, which is on January 6th, 3 days after the Congress is already sworn in. So we might not even, if we don't know who has control of the Senate at that point, we might not know until 3 days after it's
And just to
sworn
be clear, Audrey, in the runoff, the third-party candidate is not on
Yes.
the ballot. It would just be the top two.
Yes.
Okay.
Let's take a look at a couple of the paid political ads that were used in the Georgia race. And I believe I'm told that we're going to look first at the paid advertising of Michelle Nunn.
Have you seen this picture? It's the one David Perdue has used to try and attack me in this campaign. But what he doesn't tell you is that it was taken at an event honoring President Bush, who I worked for as CEO of his Points of Light Foundation. Throughout my career, I've been able to work with Republicans and Democrats, and that's the same approach I'll bring to the U.S. Senate. I'm Michelle Nunn. It's time to put politics aside and do what's best for our country. That's why I approve this message.
The issue is trust. Do you trust President Obama and the Washington politicians to deal with the problems we face? Too much debt, not enough jobs, terrorism and Ebola coming at us from overseas.
If you're as frustrated as I am by the dysfunction in Washington and believe we can do better, then I'd really appreciate your trust and your vote. I'm David Perdue, and I approve this message.
Fascinating, because on one hand, the president is being extended a 10-foot pole from his party's candidate, saying thank you very much, but no, I'm not associating with you.
I'm associating with the former President Bush.
And then Mr. Perdue comes in with some really strong rope and tries to tie the two together, along with a rope that is labeled with Ebola, terrorism, etc.
Well, and what's interesting is the Center for Disease Control, that's been so much in the news about the Ebola story, is headquartered in Atlanta.
And that's very, very true. Now, I believe we've just been told that we do want to look at some voting turnout. Is that where we want to go next? Can someone... And this is all great spontaneity. We're still sorting it out as we go. Utahns have had more and more opportunity to vote, as we mentioned at the outset of the program, in non-traditional ways. So we're going to turn our attention now to Utah Republican Party headquarters in Salt Lake City, where 11 News reporter Morgan Miller is standing by, doing some research on the role of early voting in Utah. Good evening, Morgan. Good to have you with us. What did you learn?
Yeah, several Utah counties are testing out vote-by-mail methods for this election. The counties send the voters a ballot, they fill it out, send it back to the county for counting. Now, this is just a trial run, primarily for Davis and Cache counties, but right now it looks like there are both pros and cons for the counties and for voters. The state allows absentee ballots in most elections, but mail-in voting has now become the primary method in Cache and Davis counties. The county clerk and auditor determined mail-in ballots would increase voter turnout, as well as give voters a more convenient way to cast their ballot. Davis County will keep a small number of polling places open, but rely heavily on mail-in ballots. Brian McKenzie works as a Davis County elections manager. He says the new system should improve voter turnout and also reduce tax dollars spent on elections.
Per election, the cost is a little bit higher than traditional elections, although we are finding that the cost per voter is less.
Davis County currently uses these polling machines, which McKenzie says need to be replaced. And he says when taking into account the cost of a new polling system, vote by mail may be cheaper in the long run. Oregon and Washington are two states that have transitioned to an exclusive mail-in voting system, and they stand with some of the highest voter turnout in the nation.
Not necessarily our main motivation for looking at vote by mail, but a very positive aspect of it.
Some Utah voters remain weary of this new system because of voter fraud. Others fear someone could tamper with their ballot in the mail. Voters do have the option of turning in their ballots by hand to city offices. McKenzie says those submitted through U.S. mail will get tracked, and voters can see online when their ballot reaches the county office. He says this is a trial run for Davis County, and the result will determine the future of voting in the county. Now, our KBYU Utah Colleges exit poll has some data that will give us an idea of what voters thought about this new early vote by mail method. That's coming at 8, live in Salt Lake City at Republican headquarters. Morgan Miller, Vote Utah 2014.
Thank you, Morgan. I have a quick question for you. Can you hear me? Are you able to hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Great. One other state has been added to your list of Oregon and Washington. That's Colorado, our neighboring state. It's also voting by mail in almost exclusive terms this cycle. This is a growing trend, a national trend. And so your piece here, I think, informs us about what may be coming to Utah. I think, as you illustrated, Davis County is a test case. And your research for this, is it your sense that they see themselves that way?
Yeah, that he showed me all their voting machines. Their voting machines are getting old. He said just by the cost, it makes more sense to do voting by mail. Now, some voters that I talked to weren't super happy about that. They liked traditional ways, but those will be open.
I think you're
even
exactly
if they decide
right.
to do this into the future.
I think the budget issues are largely a factor here, and those voting machines that Davis County and other counties in Utah have were paid for with federal dollars from the Help America Vote Act. And so I think the counties are feeling a pinch. What are we going to do when those computers wear out, as computers almost always do? Thank you, Morgan. It's been good talking.
Morgan is part of our team that's in Salt Lake City. We are at both Republican and Democratic Party headquarters throughout the course of this evening. We'll be turning to our reporting crew throughout the evening for updates and interviews. From one Morgan to another here on the studio set, please introduce her, Dave.
This is Morgan Williams, and she's a senior in political science from Portland, Oregon. Morgan, it's delightful to have you here. You've been studying, as part of your project in our voting class, the mode of voting and how the public feels about it.
Yeah.
Walk us through some of the data that we've gathered today in the exit poll. We're very careful about not releasing any results that might impact the election. People are still voting. So what we're talking about here is not how people voted in terms of who they chose, but how they voted in terms of the mode of their voting.
Yeah, so today in the election, we had about 67% of our voters vote in person at a polling station, and 33 voted early or through absentee ballots.
And how does that compare to prior elections?
In prior elections, we had, in a prior midterm election, we had 73% of people vote in person, while 27% vote early or through absentee. And in 2012's presidential election, we had 60% vote in person.
So the percent of people voting in person has gone down from 2010 to 2012, and it may go down in 2014. I think the numbers you gave initially are estimates.
Yeah,
since we don't really know, the voting hasn't stopped.
It has not
and so
stopped, you're right.
it's in essence an estimate from our statistics colleagues.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
It is.
Tell us some more about the data that you've analyzed on how people vote and how they feel about how they vote.
So we asked the voters today a question on what method they prefer to vote using, and what we've found is that Utah voters really don't have a clear preference. 48% of our voters, or our poll participants, said that they preferred to vote in person, while 34% that said they preferred voting early. We asked just a hypothetical question about voting on the internet, and 16% of our respondents said that they preferred that method. But there's really no clear preference across voters.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, that voting on the internet is not really an option that's being discussed in Utah, but it still shows up with roughly 1 in 5, just a little less than 1 in 5 voters wanting it. And yet, if there is a preference, we're going to be talking about this later in the evening with others as well, it is to vote in the traditional way. So Utah voters haven't cast their ballot, so to speak, for voting early yet.
I have not, no.
What are some of the concerns or the pluses and minuses for both modes of voting, do you think?
So when people were asked why they voted in person, almost about 50% of the respondents said that they preferred voting in person because it was their civic duty, and they felt as if voting in person allowed them to fulfill that civic duty. But in voting by mail, people preferred that method because of the convenience that it offered them. So it is a balance right now, I think, between a convenience thing, not having to go to your poll on election day, and then a civic duty of showing up and being a part of your community and voting on election day.
We asked voters to rank on a 1 to 4 scale some various issues that have been raised in this debate about how to vote.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about it. It's up on the screen for the viewers now.
So we see that on a scale of 1 to 4, where 4 is a strongly agree, people gave approximately 2.5 on the voting by mail system encouraging fraud. This is if they thought their votes could be tampered with, if they wouldn't be counted. People gave a 2.4 to the option of being worried that information would come out later in the campaign that would change their vote, that they would learn something about a candidate they cast their ballot for and want to change their mind, and voting by mail wouldn't allow them to. Interestingly enough, our highest results came from the 2.8 that said they'd prefer vote by mail because it's convenient.
But if I were a county clerk or the lieutenant governor, I'd worry a little bit about the fraud and other issues. Might not have all the news before you vote. Yeah. That shows that voters have some ambivalence, or maybe, Ken, some anxiety about switching the mode of voting in Utah.
People tend to have strongly held preferences and traditions, especially as you get older, as I do. I took great comfort today by standing in line with my friends and neighbors, greeting them, and then casting my ballot in a very traditional way. But it would seem to me, as a younger voter, the opportunity to do it electronically is very attractive.
Well, we're going to be doing more analysis on that, because I suspect Morgan will find in her project that if she looks at age as a variable with respect to these preferences, it'll be very different for younger, as you suggest, Ken, versus quite older voters. Although it's also fair to say, as I was working with some people who were calling people who had voted early today, a lot of those who voted early are senior citizens who, for whatever reason, maybe can't get out, so forth and so on.
Yeah, that's...
Well, let's talk a little bit more then about this notion of tradition. A place where you interned last summer, the American Enterprise Institute, one of the senior scholars there, Norman Ornstein, has talked a lot about his views that we have a tradition of voting on election day and that it's something we shouldn't get rid of. What do you make of that argument, and why?
I think that, as Ken mentioned, he's right. The older generations do, I think, feel that voting in person on election day gives them that sense of community. But I think as a younger voter, and I believe my peers also as younger voters would believe that we can still be a part of that community and have that sense of tradition by casting our ballot in different ways. It doesn't lessen the engagement in the voting process. It just we just feel that engagement in a different way.
You may do it through Facebook rather than standing in line.
Well, it's just whatever's convenient.
In the exit poll, didn't we also ask about how they felt about putting that "I voted" sticker on?
We did, and I can get that number. We found that 13% of our exit poll respondents said that they preferred voting in person because they liked wearing their "I voted" sticker.
Morgan Williams, this has been very insightful. Thank you for joining us and talking about how we vote in Utah and how the public feels about how we vote in Utah.
And I commend your accuracy, if not the pain of your metrics, that I am, in fact, an older American voter that is comfortable voting by ballot. We have a lot going on. One figure we do want to take advantage of, an opportunity to speak with now, is at Salt Lake City with our reporting team at the Democratic Party headquarters. This is former Utah State Democratic Party Chairman Jim DeBacchus. Of course, Utah State Senator from Utah's 2nd Senate District, Jim DeBacchus. If I'm correct, Senator, standing for re-election this night as well. How do you feel about the prospects with the polls still open?
I feel like I'm in my last moments of being a senator.
I beg your pardon. Do you really?
No, I mean, my district went about 72% for President Obama, so it would be quite an upset if I lost. But can I ask you a question, Professor?
Sure.
2 years ago, your team was the only team that not only called the Matheson-Love race, but you got it almost exactly correct. So
we were biting our nails that night,
Is Owens
Jim.
going to win?
We were biting our nails that night, Jim. And I appreciate the sincerity of your question, and I would invite you to view, come back and view us at exactly 8 o'clock tonight. We'll be happy to share our results. You're not the only person that...
I won't tell anybody.
Well, yeah, sure.
What's the theme, the most prevalent theme you hear as you talk to Utah voters this midterm election? What are they most concerned about?
They seem to be most concerned about apathy. I mean, in 2010, the last election we could compare this one directly to, we had a terrible turnout, and we're going to be considerably below that. So we need to get the state focusing once again on how to get people enthusiastic and excited and involved in the political process. It's bad for the state to be 49th in participation.
Time and time again, we heard today, Senator, from young and old alike, that a vote made little difference because all of the races seemingly had an ordained outcome, that we know what the results were going to be. Do you experience that as you represent not only your own candidacy, but your party throughout the state? And I think we've just lost the Senate. There we go. You've just doubled the numbers there in Salt Lake City.
Look, I think the real problem goes back to total Republican control, and we have this gerrymandering situation where Democrats actually get somewhere around 37 or 38% of the votes and then 19% of the seats. I mean, Vladimir Putin would think that's democratic. So that is really a critical thing we have to address is redistricting for the next 10 years, because we did a terrible gerrymandering job in the last time.
Time and again, we hear that 2014 is going to be the springboard for 2016. Of course, then we have a major Senate race in Utah. We have the governor's office being up for statewide balloting again. Is this a springboard in any sense of the imagination as you keep that child as comfortable as she possibly can be? But do you see, with apathy reigning today, this doesn't seem to be much of a springboard for either party towards 2016?
Well, it's good news for Mike Lee if the electorate stays apathetic, because he has the warrior zealots on the right, but I hear more and more moderate, reasonable Republicans that are saying that they're going to get in order for them to play, they're going to need a much more activated, reasonable Utah Republican Party as well as Democrats. That'll be an important thing to keep an eye on.
Senator Jim Debacus,
thank you,
as always, it's a great pleasure to chat with you. Best wishes for the rest of this evening and in your re-election campaign. We'll
all be listening to KBYU at 8 o'clock, because then we're going to know who's winning that congressional race.
Thank you very much, and spread that word as well. The Vote Utah Election Night broadcast is a collaboration of some extraordinary academic partners. If you're seeing, as a matter of fact, you're starting to already see their work during the 6 o'clock hour on KBYU television and, of course, our Vote Utah website. It would not be possible without some great benefactors as well who make it financially possible. Let me thank our very good friends at Zions Bank, Qualtrics, the law firm of Ray Quinney and Nebeker, our additional donors, Google and Nu Skin. They have all made a difference in making tonight possible. Our thanks once again to them. We are going to take a short break. And welcome back to Live Vote Utah 2014 election coverage here on the campus of Brigham Young University. I'm Ken Verdoia, along with BYU Distinguished Professor of Political Science Dave Magleby. And just before the break, we started thanking people who had made donations. But what's very important is to thank the academic institutions throughout the state who have provided this small army of bright young men and women to go out and help us with the exit polling.
Agreed, Ken. And those corporate sponsors have helped make this possible, but so have our colleagues at our participating institutions. And they begin in the north with Utah State University, Damon Cann, Weber State University, Leah Murray, Sean Raleigh at Westminster College, Jay Desart at UVU, at SUU Kevin Stein, and my colleagues here at BYU, Dan Williams, Howard Christensen, and Joseph Olson. Without them, a project of this scope simply wouldn't have been possible, and I want to make sure they know how much they're appreciated.
When you think about it, 1,200 young men and women, students at these various institutions, fanned out under a very close order to do this duty of exit polling requires great orchestration. Dr. Magleby, of course, one of the key figures, but the faculty and staff of Brigham Young University making this happen once again, and as a elected political official noted, with great accuracy in the past. It's a strong track record made possible by this collaborative effort. So our gratitude to all the academic institutions.
Well, and it's wonderful to watch how the students take ownership of this project. A small element, just an example, it's called interviewer recruitment and training. So they go to classrooms and enlist the volunteers from freshman classes, often at this university and others, and then they subsequently train them in how to go out and do that. That involves driving to Utah State 3 or 4 weeks ago, driving to Cedar City. They seem to be tireless in all of this, Ken. It's remarkable.
And not only are they serving in the exit polling, but they are also our key exit polling analysts. And I'd like to point out that we have a group of them in our studio right now that are working through the data that was gained from the exit poll during the day today, as well as students making up our regional analysts who are closely watching the races throughout this country. This includes the critical United States Senate count that we're keeping an eye on, as well as the office of governor throughout the country, and those 400 plus House of Representative seats that are out there as well. So we're keeping an eye on all of this. Let's go to one of our regional analysts now. That's Alejandra Jimenez.
Okay, we're
not going to go to Alejandra. Alejandra, I'm just giving you a standby that we're going to come to you and discuss soon one of the Senate races. But for now, let's stay on set and talk about the Affordable Care Act.
Cassie Crook, a senior in public health from Spanish Fork, Utah, has specialized on the Affordable Care Act, otherwise known as Obamacare. How has that issue been important in this cycle?
It's interesting enough because early on in the race, the Republicans took a stand and, were adamantly advocating for reform or even repeal in some cases. Well, the Democrats on the, other end of the spectrum remained silent on the Affordable Care Act.
It was almost a defining issue early on. I think you've got an example from one of the Senate races, don't you?
I do, especially here in Utah. Chris Stewart mentions it in his opening statement and goes as far as to say that it's a disaster. Well, Doug Owens, on the other hand, interesting enough, talks about Obamacare, its pros and its cons.
Well, let's watch that clip if we can, the debate clip.
Pursue your American dream.
Mary Landrieu cast the deciding vote to make you live under Obamacare. But just a few days ago, she voted to shut down the government rather than give up her own special exemption from Obamacare. That's right, Congress gets its own special exemption from Obamacare. You get the worst of Obamacare, she gets a special subsidy. Call her today and tell her, open the government, stop spending taxpayer money on Obamacare.
So, what role did that play in that Senate race? We'll turn to the Utah races in a moment.
Yeah, so the Republicans, particularly the Tea Party in this case, have kind of put together a cookie cutter ad where they're targeting Democratic incumbents. And
what does a cookie cutter ad mean? Out of somebody's kitchen? I don't know.
So it means that the only thing that they've changed are the names and the pictures.
So they've run the same ad in other states, just substituting other senators?
Yes.
Okay, but she cast the tie-breaking vote.
Yes.
How many ties were there?
Apparently a lot.
Okay. Well, and what has her response been?
Her response is that she would vote for Obamacare again.
Oh, so she doesn't back away from her vote?
No, she has suggested a supplement bill of reform as well, and she's working on that.
Well, we'll watch through the whole evening the extent to which the parties have sort of tussled over how to use Obama negatively and positively. This is an interesting ad that shows it negatively. Now, you were talking a moment ago about the debates in Utah, and I think it'd be interesting for our viewers to see how the issue surfaced in debates. Ken and I were the moderators of some of these debates.
That's correct. And it's interesting once again, because as we've seen with the political ads, there were certain candidates that attempted to bind their opponent to Obamacare as well as the president, while others ran staunchly against it. You identified earlier the way Representative Stewart spoke out, and also the way the Democratic candidate in the 4th District spoke out moderately warmly. Let's take a look at their campaign or their statements in those debates.
We can't go this night without talking about Obamacare and the disaster it's been for millions of hardworking American families. I believe in the American dream.
There are some things that we like in it, right? The fact that it allows parents to keep their children on their insurance policies later in life. The fact that people can't be denied based on pre-existing conditions. So to me, as somebody who's interested in pragmatic solutions, it seems obvious. Let's just go to work, keep the parts we like, and work on what we don't like on a bipartisan basis, and not have a polarized dialogue such as emerged after the shutdown last fall.
Interestingly enough, Cassie, Mr. Stewart, running for re-election, brought it up in his opening statement, sort of asking for a question about it. I don't think a question ever came in that debate, so
it didn't,
the clip you have is the only chance he had to talk about the issue. Thank you so much for informing us about how this issue has been important.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. And as I previously indicated, Alejandro Jimenez is keeping an eye on New Hampshire for us, where there's a pivotal United States Senate seat up, and it's hotly contested. Charges of carpetbagging, charges of you know me, you can trust me, going back and forth. Alejandro, where do we stand in New Hampshire? Who are the candidates, and what's the vote looking like?
Yeah, so right now we have Democratic incumbent Senator Jeanne Shaheen going against Republican challenger Scott Brown. Right now in the vote, it's looking like she is actually pulling ahead by a fairly large margin that has not been called yet. In the race itself, Brown has kind of been the underdog. An interesting thing about this race is that he actually ran, he won a special seat election in 2010 for the Massachusetts Senate. And then he ran again in 2012 and he lost that Senate. And so now he's back in New Hampshire trying to get back to the Senate.
The preliminary numbers we're getting with are only about 15% of the precincts reporting has Shaheen with a 12-point lead. But again, at this stage, with only about 15%, as Alejandro has indicated, it's a little too early to call. What have been the issues that they've used in their paid political advertising to make points against each other, Alejandro?
Yeah, as you mentioned earlier, Obama's been a big bargaining point in this one. Senator Shaheen has done quite a bit with Obama, and Brown has been pushing that. And so he actually came out with an ad that, multiple ads to be exact, that showed her strong connection with Obama, often in a very chummy way, hugging, shaking hands, holding hands together, and triumph. And he's trying to push to the voters that if you're not happy with Obama, you won't be happy with Shaheen either.
And in a specific way, they've done that with the immigration issue, which is normally thought of as a big issue in New Hampshire.
Exactly.
I think you have an ad to show us that illustrates how Brown has tried to exploit immigration.
Exactly.
Want to know why there's lawlessness on our border? Ask Senator Shaheen. She voted against border security twice and for amnesty. It's time for us to secure the border and enforce the law. I'm Scott Brown, and I approve this message.
And how has Shaheen responded?
She's been trying to go with the idea of that she is supporting the local people. Again, trying to separate herself from Obama, from things that, not that she's backed away from what she's already done in Washington, but that she's trying to go back to the roots of the people and that she can help the people in New Hampshire as well.
As we had with Christian Carter earlier, I think the Clintons have taken out residency in New Hampshire, haven't they?
Mm-hmm.
Well, maybe that's going to happen in January and February, too.
You might just consider it the plowing of the field for what will play out in 2015 and 2016 with Hillary Clinton's expected, anticipated candidacy. Alejandra, thank you so very much. We are going to trust you to keep an eye on New Hampshire for us. We want to shift down our regional analyst panel and go to Ryan Beecham, because Ryan is keeping an eye on the very, very interesting race in the United States Senate in North Carolina. Ryan, where do we stand this evening?
That's right. This race has been close throughout. Pre-election polls, even early voting, has shown that the race has been neck and neck. And then Kay Hagan Democratic incumbent Senator Kay Hagan has taken a slight lead. A lot of times this is due to larger cities that tend to be Democratic coming in later in the polls. But as of now, Kay Hagan has a very substantial lead in North Carolina. It hasn't been called yet, but it is expected that she would win.
Now, Ryan, you're a native North Carolinian, so
yes,
you've
sir.
been following this race with some interest. I think you've got a clip, actually, that shows some of the issues and how those have been depicted through the news media in North Carolina. Is
Yes,
that right?
Yes, sir.
We'll see that now.
Leading the effort to register more minority voters is the Reverend William Barber, president of the state chapter of the NAACP.
All Americans must have the right to vote, unhindered, unabridged, undenied.
Barber hopes to mobilize voters on behalf of Senator Kay Hagan, a Democrat facing a strong challenge from Republican Tom Tillis.
This movement is about an intense focus, using our deepest moral values from the scriptures of many faiths and our deepest moral values from the Constitution, and challenging extremism that is trying to lead us in a regressive turn throughout America.
Conservative activists are also preparing for the election, including Wilson Tea Party activist Joel Killian. His focus is cutting the size of government.
Liberalism, progressivism, in the classical sense, even going back to 1890 where the progressive era started, that's really the poison that I believe entered into the country and grew this idea of a massive bureaucratic paternalistic government.
Well, it's not just the news media. I think the NRA got involved in this one. Is that right?
They did. We also have a clip about that. And there's also a really good still that shows...
Why don't we see the still, because I think we're a little short on time. Let's pull up the still if we can, and explain this to our viewers.
As you can see here, we have President Obama and Kay Hagan in front of the Constitution, and they're shredding it. A lot of Republican voters don't like that Kay Hagan does side with President Obama, and especially when it comes to the NRA and their Second Amendment rights, being able to carry guns. And so with this, it's really in favor of Tom Tillis that
Right.
he should get some votes from this.
They're attacking Hagan and
Yes.
linking her to Obama. And now I think it's interesting to note that we're going to see this over and over again, where it's not only the Obama referendum we talked about earlier, but outside groups using that ad, not just the Republican candidates. Now, Ryan, thank you very much. I think, Ken, as we go through the evening, these two states are important bellwethers, New Hampshire and North Carolina. If the Democrats could win both of those, it's going to be a long night. If they lose both of those, then the move to a Republican majority in the Senate is more likely.
And so we're going to be going back to Okay. All right. Well, we are going to turn our attention back to Democratic headquarters in Salt Lake City, where one of our KBYU reporters is standing by. Eric Mock has been keeping an eye on the issues and influences on voter turnout, which is always a significant issue. You heard State Senator Jim DeBacchus talk about it earlier, about how apathy may be one of the big issues in 2014. Eric, what have you been finding with your research into the subject of voter turnout?
Well, Ken, now we haven't seen as big a turnout as we did in 2012, but dedicated Utah voters still showed up despite the cold air and the frozen windshields to make their voice heard. Little Lexi Williamson wants her parents to vote for a new school.
McKinnon Elementary in Tempe.
The Williamson family just moved to Utah from Texas. This is their first election here, and they want to get out and be a part of the community.
It's just kind of a social thing too, just makes it kind of fun.
This year's election doesn't feature a presidential, gubernatorial, or senatorial race. Historically, this means fewer voters at the polls. This election may be different, though, because of issues like the Provo bond and Utah constitutional amendments. Kathleen Larson is a seasoned poll worker, and she says senior citizens are typically strong at the polls regardless.
I see some of the elderly just hobbling in with walkers and wheelchairs to try to exercise that right that they have to vote.
Jean Wagner is an experienced voter and always gets to the polls no matter what is on the ballot.
As long as I've been old enough, I've voted every year.
Early voting and mail-in ballots can be convenient for some, but for the Williamsons, they come in person to see democracy in action.
And plus, you get to see the system at work. It's an important thing to kind of be a part of all that.
Eric, I want to thank you once again. I need to point out that I was a little geographically challenged. You are at the actual headquarters of the Utah Republican Party. You're at the Salt Lake Hilton. We'll be coming back to you throughout the course of the evening for more insight and interviews. But thank you for that piece on voter turnout. And Dave Magleby, voter turnout is a significant issue.
It is a significant issue, and in a midterm it's down, and in Utah, as Senator DeBacchus mentioned, it's been down especially. One of the causes of that, Ken, is the absence of serious competition. voters react when they think something's at stake. If they don't think something's at stake, they don't.
Let's take a look at the historic traffic or turnout that's been evident over time as we studied it.
Well, as you can see, the presidential turnout in the 1950s was 61%. It stayed pretty constant. What's happened, though, is turnout in the midterm years has dropped since the 2000 election, and that's despite the fact that nationally races are very close in presidential races and in many of these Senate races. But scholars who have studied this have found a clear connection between a competitive race and turnout. And the absence of that in Utah is a big part of our problem.
Well, one of the people in Utah most concerned, in fact, most energetically encouraging voter turnout this year was the Lieutenant Governor of the state, Spencer Cox. And he joins us now from Republican Election Party headquarters in Salt Lake City. And Lieutenant Governor, thanks so much. You became almost a poster boy, if you will, for Get Out the Vote efforts. You went viral at times on social media with your messaging. How do you feel about the message that you carried this election year, this midterm election year, to the voters in Utah?
Well, we feel very good about the message, and as you've mentioned, unfortunately, Utah continues to be ranked near the bottom when it comes to civic participation. And so we took that very personally because we know that's not who Utah is or who we are or what we believe in. And so we made a real concerted effort to get out to engage people on a very personal level, and then to try to take that using social media and other avenues open to us to really engage and hopefully to get people out there, register to vote, and then to actually vote.
With elections now part of your portfolio as Lieutenant Governor, I remember it wasn't that long ago when Utah proudly was very, very highly ranked in the nation in terms of its voter turnout. What do you think has eroded that tendency to voter turnout over the years?
Well, we get asked that question all the time, and I wish there was kind of one thing that we could focus on. It's obviously a little more complicated than that. Being a one-party dominant state hasn't helped much. Too often we get to the polls in November and there are uncontested races. We've seen that again, or races that are contested but not close. When you have an exciting race like we're seeing in the 4th District this time and last time, that tends to generate again a little more voter turnout. So there's that. There is a little bit of a positive spin on this, I guess, as we continue to get accolades as the best managed state. We're tops in so many important metrics. By and large, there are a lot of people that are really happy with the way things are going. And you tend to see higher voter turnout when people are angry and engaged that way. So the good news is that people are, I think, very much pleased with the direction of the state, but that's still not a good excuse. I think there's a generational shift as well. We continue to see that. I hate to sound like my dad or my grandfather, but these kids these days, it's hard to get them involved and engaged, and we're working very hard to include younger people in our Get Out the Vote efforts.
Lieutenant Governor, we're going to go to some of that data on the difference in turnout with young people in just a moment, but I want to thank you and your office for your help. As you know, we have included in this year's KBYU Utah Colleges Exit Poll several questions about the mode of voting, which we think will help inform the debate about ways we might change the way we vote in the future. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, and thanks for your great work. We look forward to hearing the numbers, and hopefully people are still out there voting right now.
Thank you very much. Back again for more is Morgan Williams, and as the Lieutenant Governor just mentioned, one of the issues is there a difference in who votes in midterms and presidential years in Utah? So let's talk a little bit about some of those differences.
Yeah, I think both in Utah and as a nation, we see different levels of turnout from different groups, depending on whether it's a midterm or a presidential election. Typically, younger people turn out in greater rates at the presidential election, where elderly people make up a larger percentage of the vote in those midterm election years. That's one of the fundamental differences, as well as the difference in ideological turnout.
Our viewers are now seeing the difference in, well, let's go to the age, it's already up there.
Yeah.
And as you can see, in the presidential year, 30% of the electorate was under 34. In 2010, less than 20%. So it's the young people in Utah, Ken, as well as nationally, who tend to stay home in midterms. That's a big part of the Democrats' problem in battleground states. Mm-hmm. And then the reverse is true if you look at older people who are 65 and older. And They tend to be a quarter of the electorate in 2010 and down to 15% in 2012. Let's look at a couple of those other variables you were mentioning.
Yeah, so we also have a variable on ideology in turnout.
Let's look at party ID.
Yeah, what we're seeing right now is party ID. I'm not aware of
Well, I think we're going to, here's we go to ideology.
Okay, here's ideology. As we can see, turnout in a midterm election year is greater among those who have a stronger ideology. There's not a comparison on the screen of conservative, liberal, and moderates in the midterm and presidential election years, but you see that in midterm elections, the conservatives turn out more than the other political ideologies.
Again, an underlying element here is this midterm elections, conservatives are much more active. That was just up on our screen. What about women?
So women turn out more than men do in presidential elections, while the turnout levels in midterm elections are approximately equal. And so
and religion.
So what we're finding in Utah is that active members of LDS congregations turn out more to vote or make up a larger percentage of the electorate in midterm years than they do in presidential election years.
So to summarize, a midterm electorate in Utah is more conservative, older, more likely to be active LDS, and more male than the electorate in a presidential year.
That is what we're seeing, yes.
And therefore, it's going to be harder in many ways for Democrats, generally speaking, in a midterm year than a presidential in Utah. Thank you, Morgan. That was very helpful.
As you've heard now from a couple of folks that have joined us in interviews this evening, a lot of people are leaning into the 8 o'clock hour here at KBYU in the campus of Brigham Young University for the release of our Utah exit poll numbers. At 8 p.m., we will be rolling out those numbers not 1 second before 8 o'clock straight up.
Even when Senator DeBacchus...
Even when Senator DeBacchus brings a cute child into the interview to encourage us to do otherwise, it will not happen. But stay with us, because the number and effort are very, very interesting to look at. They tell us a great deal about what people were thinking about today, in addition to how they selected candidates. The beauty of the poll data is far beyond projecting a winner. Viewers will also get a better view of what was on the voters' minds in terms of issues and who they were, who was the average voter this year. If you've already seen a little bit of the data we were discussing about, let's consider a little bit more about how the Utah exit poll is put together. And we'll turn our attention back up to Utah Democratic Party headquarters, where a reporter, Dave Neely, is standing by, and Dave is prepared to brief us on how the exit poll really comes together. Dave. Dave Neely, can you join us and bring us up to speed on the exit poll?
It's a big state and a big job to get this poll conducted throughout all of Utah. I've had the opportunity the last couple of days to get a behind-the-scenes look at what occurs to make the poll happen today, so that we can have those results that Jim DeBacchus talked about at 8 p.m. tonight. "120 polling locations, 1,200 volunteers, all of them students from 6 Utah colleges, doing what their predecessors have done for the past 3 decades.
I'm working as a Utah College's exit pollster, so I'm handing out surveys to randomly selected participants.
BYU started the exit poll 32 years ago and gives students a front row seat at the democratic process.
We try to gauge what Utah voters are feeling beyond just simply their vote choice.
In 2012's election, the Utah College's exit poll was perfect in projecting the outcome of the 10 most visible federal and local races.
We're definitely the most accurate. We've got a really great history. It's a really great poll that gives us the information before the actual vote.
Voters answer questions on this year's exit poll about today's races, as well as hypothetical questions about what races Utah might see in 2016.
Jim Matheson against Mike Lee. It's a question that a lot of people have been asking. And so by adding those hypotheticals, we can see what the Utah electorate thinks right now.
The pollsters have already conducted 2,100 phone surveys and expect to collect at least 12,000 more in person today, which means, in all, more than 14,000 Utahns will contribute to this year's exit poll.
It's the largest type in the country and does a very good job at predicting what the outcome's going to be, but also providing a lot of research opportunities for students and faculty.
And Professor Williams also told me that in some ways the KBYU Utah College's exit poll is the Cadillac of all exit polls because of what it's able to accomplish behind the volunteers and the hardworking students that participate. From the Democratic headquarters in Salt Lake City, Dave Neely, Vote Utah 2014.
Thanks, Dave Neely. I thought Dan Williams only drove a Porsche. Joining us now is Royce Hackett, a senior in statistics from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. You've been part of the courses. There are two of them in statistics that are heavily involved in designing this. Royce, would you please walk us through the various modes we have of gathering data this time?
Yes, in order to get accurate and unbiased data, we needed to make sure that we were able to capture all the ways that the voters are voting. From the state of Utah, we were able to obtain a list of those who voted early or by mail. From that list, we drew a random sample of 20,000, and we sent them a postcard. On that postcard, we invited them to take an online survey. If people didn't decide that they didn't want to take the survey, we actually had a call center that we would call those people, staffed by statistics students. We had over 440, and we helped them to take that survey online.
So we nagged them until we got it, right?
That's right.
We're after the data.
That's right. We want accurate results. And then that was the early in people who voted by mail. And then we also needed to capture the vote of people who voted today. From that, as the video mentioned, we had over 120 locations with 12,000 students. Our goal is to get about 12,000 surveys done today.
Wow, that's a lot of data. Thank you so much, Royce, for this work and for your classmates who've made this so important.
And by extension, our thanks to the 1,200 students and all the academic institutions that participated. We will be back at 8 p.m. with those much anticipated KBYU Utah College exit poll. Until then, we are going to leave you in the very capable hands of the PBS NewsHour to catch you up to date with what's going on nationally. Races are being called. Stay with us because we'll have the national latest information at 8 p.m. We will be back with our exit poll results. Everybody's expecting it. Be here for those numbers at 8 p.m.
Production of Vote Utah 2014 election night coverage is made possible by generous grants from Zions Bank, serving the communities of Utah for over 140 years. Zions Bank offers a range of banking services for individuals and businesses, large and small. Learn more at zionsbank.com. And from Qualtrics, supporting business and the academic community with online survey services and expertise. More information at qualtrics.com. Qualtrics, the ridiculously powerful insight platform. And from the law firm of Ray, Quinney & Nebeker, a multi-service local law firm actively seeking to improve the quality of life in our community. Over 100 attorneys serve Utahns' legal needs from offices in Salt Lake City and Provo. Learn more at rqn.com. Additional production funding comes from Google, a global technology leader focused on improving the ways people connect with information. And from Nu Skin, demonstrating a 30-year commitment to community support and offering nutritional and personal care products. Nu Skin, the difference demonstrated. Learn more at nuskin.com.